Well, I will iterate Anne's word. It is a privilege to be with you. My first time in Australia, New Zealand, and it was a long ride, but it's well worth being here and knowing that your winter is just like Seattle's winter, so I feel very much at home for that. This program is really designed to, I think, reiterate and repeat a number of concepts and things, knowing that repetition often helps us to learn and to be educated. But the ultimate goal is to improve cardiac arrest in your community. And those of you who live here in Auckland, I hope you appreciate how beautiful your city is. But I also realize that some of you may come from other communities, and the real goal here is addressing the needs that your community has and what you can do as a provider, as a leader, as a participant in improving outcome from cardiac arrest. Let me just put that in some context. In the United States, in 2018, there were over 350,000 cardiac arrests that occur. And survival across the nation, on average, all comers, is about 10.8%, or a little less than 11%. And the question is, do you know your survival statistics in your community, in your country, in your city, in your agency? And that's one of the initial questions we ask at the Resuscitation Academy is, where are you? Because knowing where you are knows, in part, tells you where you ought to go. Now, we have a lot of things in common across cities, across countries, and that is we have very comparable algorithms for approaching the management of cardiac arrest. In the United States, the American Heart Association publishes the guidelines, ILCOR, and other resuscitation councils is what you have here in Australia and New Zealand. So we all follow the same science, and we have, in many cases, pretty standardized protocols for treating cardiac arrest. We also have similar algorithms in terms of the chain of survival. We have similar defibrillators. We have intubation equipment. We have many things that are very much in common across the world. And you would expect, therefore, that we should be achieving the same results in terms of outcome from cardiac arrest. But if you look at what's been published across the world, and this is just a sampling of cardiac arrest survival to hospital discharge after ventricular fibrillation, there is more than an 8-fold disparity in outcome from cardiac arrest across the world, despite having the same science, the same equipment, and the same algorithms, an 8-fold disparity. It gets a little bit worse because if you look at individual cities in the United States, and I suspect the same thing is probably true worldwide, take a country and divide it up by cities, take the United States and divide it up by cities, there's more than 100-fold difference in outcome from out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. Now, can you imagine if you had a problem like pneumonia or appendicitis, and in one city your survival rate would be close to 0, and in another community it would be close to 70, 80, 90%? Would that be an acceptable response to how we treat a major illness? And yet that's exactly what goes on in cardiac arrest. We have the science, we have the algorithms, we have the equipment, but we have a huge disparity in outcome. And the question really becomes, why is that the case? Why is it that things are so different, that we can be doing things the same way, but we achieve different outcomes? And if I could put it in this sort of context, it's not the science or the algorithms, I think, that are the problem. We can certainly improve upon those. The problem is the framework that we put those particular algorithms and science in, and how they are implemented in a community that ultimately determines whether a patient lives or whether a patient dies. And so the Resuscitation Academy is all about improving cardiac arrest, but not necessarily by changing the science or the algorithms. It's by doing something that turns that science into something that's actionable, that can be implemented, and can use the science and the knowledge and the equipment that we have in a way that makes it efficient and effective in improving outcome from cardiac arrest. And this is where the 10 programs or 10 steps to improving survival from cardiac arrest come from. As Ann Dahl mentioned, Mickey Eisenberg and Michael Kopis and Leonard Cobb, the real fathers of emergency medicine in Seattle and King County, over the years developed concepts of things that seem to work in our community that have made survival better than in many others, and saying this should not be unique to one city, it should not be unique to one geographic area. It's a message that perhaps we can translate and transfer to other communities so they can perform and they can come up to the same standard that we really want everyone to have across the world. And that's the basis for the 10 steps. And again, this is a photograph of the Ford Motor Company manufacturing these Model T cars. The goal of the 10 steps isn't to make everyone a cookie cutter in your community. These are steps that you need to look at and think about adapting in your community as a framework, but adapting to the needs and the challenges that you face that will make resuscitation outcome better. So part of what I'm going to try to do in the next 20 minutes or so is simply give you an overview of the 10 steps that we're going to subdivide and talk about in greater detail throughout the course of today and tomorrow. But to just give you a heads up, part of it will be repetition, but to telling you what these steps are and how they potentially can impact the outcome from cardiac arrest. And the way that I try to divide these up is, rather than trying to swallow all 10 steps, to divide them up into what you can consider low-hanging fruit or high-hanging fruit. The low-hanging fruit being, what are the steps that potentially have the greatest impact on the outcome from cardiac arrest and potentially may be more easily implemented in a community than what some of the others are. And those include a cardiac arrest registry, dispatch-assisted CPR, HighPerformance CPR, and rapid dispatch. And let me just give an overview of each one of these. Cardiac arrest registry is a dirty word, right? Because it means data, and data means bookwork, and data, computers, and information coming in, and ultimately creating a stack of information that just clogs our desks and, our computer memory, and saying, this is nice to have all these data, but what do we do with all this information? Gathering data for a registry in an EMS system is also very challenging, more so than in a hospital, because you have to integrate information from many other different sources. One is from the EMS record itself. What did the providers do on scene? How was that documented? That includes data that's acquired from defibrillators, electronic data, what rhythms were evaluated, what the performance of CPR was. It involves having access to your computerized assisted dispatch system. What were the precise times that a call came through? When did EMS arrive? How long were they on scene? When did they leave? And finally, ideally, outcome from hospitals. What was the bottom line when all was said and done? Did the patient walk out the door? Did the patient die in the emergency department? Or were they ultimately discharged in good shape? Fundamentally, what we want to do with all these data is to measure our performance. How well are we doing? And as part of that particular measurement, falling back on what Ann mentioned before, the foundation of the Resuscitation Academy is measure and improve. If we don't know where we are, we won't know where we're going, and we won't know what we need to do. And that's why a registry in and of itself can have an impact on your performance. Because the moment we recognize how well or how poorly we may be performing, we now have an incentive of saying, if we want to do better, we can do better, and we can fall back on that information to direct us going forward. So what are the other specific low-hanging fruits that we can really adapt? The second is dispatcher-assisted telecommunicator CPR. Are there any dispatch individuals here, either from dispatch centers or not? Okay, perfect. 1, 2. Can I really say that we credit fire department or BLS as often being the first responders on scene to a cardiac arrest? And that's actually not the case. The real first responders are the 911 call receivers, the emergency call receivers, because those individuals are the ones who are tasked to recognize whether it's a cardiac arrest, to dispatch, and ideally to actually institute treatments at the moment the call is provided. And that now is possible by cell phones and other means of media where information can be taken from the telecommunicator to the caller, and the call receiver can be instructed to perform CPR. The call receiver can be instructed, if the telecommunicator knows there's an AED nearby, to provide that AED and to institute therapy at the scene before anyone actually arrives there besides the public individual who made the call. That makes telecommunicators the real first responders in an EMS system. And here's how we ideally would like to see that sort of response work. This is an actual online call of a telecommunicator talking to a 911 caller and instructing them about what to do for a victim in cardiac arrest. Whoops. I may need your help to play this one, Fred, if that's okay. Thank you.
If you have an AED, go get it and go bring it over here, okay? While someone's doing that, let's start CPR. Put the palm of your hand right in the middle of his chest and put your other hand on top of that other hand. With straight arms, I need you to push down as hard as you can, just like you're pumping the chest. Let's start now. Push, 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 push. 1, 2. I need to hear someone to count for me. 3, 4, 1. Count out loud so I can hear you.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1.
Keep going.
3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
He's starting to breathe a little bit. He's starting to gasp.
Keep going unless his eyes are open and he pushes you away. Keep going.
2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3,
Come here,
4.
take this spot.
1, 2,
Let's take this spot. Right here, visible.
2.
We have an AED attached.
Okay, if you have an AED attached, if you're able to go get it, if you can follow the instructions, see if it recommends a shock.
Keep going. Keep going. That's a call for help.
3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1.
He had it with your leg up. He shot his arm.
Charging.
Stand.
Charging, let's go.
Rapid flashing shot. Clear. Rapid flashing shot. 1. It is immediate. He put his second push anyway. Begin CPR.
Did it shock him?
Yeah, they just gave him one shock. They're present on chest right now.
So what you've heard in action is a resuscitation provided by a bystander before EMS arrives with both CPR and defibrillation, and ultimately a patient that survived because treatment was provided virtually immediately after the arrest occurred. Dispatch-assisted telecommunicator CPR can revolutionize our approach to resuscitation. High-performance CPR, that is something we'll be talking in a lot more detail about. What is the purpose and the message behind high-performance CPR? What we use high-performance CPR in our community to do, first of all, is to motivate, to let providers know that in our hands we have the capability of saving lives. The hands can do the job. Moreover, what we often emphasize in our system is that BLS owns CPR. The initial providers on scene take control of CPR. They provide that machinery of hands-on CPR throughout the course of resuscitation. We also believe in performance standards, and some of these we'll be talking about in greater detail. The rate of compression, the depth of compression, interruptions in CPR, those are all parameters that we can measure, we can provide feedback, and we can institute changes in an effort to improve CPR. Part of the importance of CPR is not only training about individual skills, how well an individual performs CPR, but how that ultimately is choreographed when a number of providers come on scene. If you've ever been in a cardiac arrest in a hospital, it often looks like, a bunch of chickens running around and one person doesn't quite know what the other person is doing. You have individuals who know how to perform CPR, but when they come together as a group, there's no choreography. It's total chaos and disorganization. And we don't have to have it that way in an EMS system. We can plan and choreograph our approaches to resuscitation by appreciating what needs to be done beforehand, who ought to do those tasks, and how that task potentially can be done. Let me just give you an illustration of that, of how it potentially can be done in an EMS system when there's a cardiac arrest. Initially with 4 people on scene, BLS providers, you'll see ALS providers coming on scene, and note the choreography that you see between these groups as they perform their tasks.
Pulse analyzing.
Stand clear. Analyzing now. Stand clear. Shock advised.
30 compressions.
Stand clear. Push the shock.
ALS now on scene.
8, 9, 30. Clear. Back in. We just went through our first cycle and we got a shock.
9, 10. First shot?
Yep.
How long are you guys going to do this?
Just one cycle. 2 minutes.
8, 9, 10.
Notice the choreography.
8, 9, 10.
Get the picture? How everything comes together in an organized and choreographed way. So, high-performance CPR. Rapid dispatch. What is rapid dispatch all about? Simply put, it's sending help as soon as it's clear that at least BLS is needed. Meaning the moment that an emergency is recognized that help is needed, sorting out what kind of emergency it might be is probably time wasting because you can institute a response at the point you know providers need to be on scene. That can save at least 30 seconds or more in getting assistance on scene to initiate efforts, particularly if it's a cardiac arrest. That can be a challenge with some dispatch systems because some require providing more questions and answers before dispatch is sent, and that can be a challenge in some areas. It's an area, though, that you can provide or establish performance standards, saying how quickly is help being summoned when help is needed, and it's something that you can package together with telecommunicator CPR in an effort to improve outcomes. Here's what rapid dispatch is all about. Question number 1, is help needed on scene? Doesn't matter what kind of help, but what kind is help needed? If so, BLS can be immediately dispatched. Question 2 and 3, is the patient conscious and is the patient breathing normally? If the answer is no, no, then the response is to go. That is a probable cardiac arrest. That's when you send maximum help and that simultaneously you institute telecommunicator CPR. Simple process. Is help needed? No, no, in terms of conscious and breathing normally, and immediately presume cardiac arrest and treat accordingly. So that's the low-hanging fruit, the fruit that we think has the potential for the greatest impact on outcome in cardiac arrest. Many of the systems that you work within may already have instituted some of those changes or are working on instituting them. And at that point, you say, well, what can we do above and beyond the low-hanging fruit to have an even greater and added impact in treating cardiac arrest? And these are the higher hanging fruit. These are the ones that can require more effort. In terms of impact, they clearly have an impact, but the bigger money, I think, is in the lower hanging fruit, but potentially can improve outcomes from cardiac arrest. That includes reviewing resuscitations, enlisting police and other first responders to perform CPR and AEDs, meaning outside the EMS system itself, looking at smart technologies, promoting public CPR and AED training, practicing accountability, and fostering a culture of excellence. So let's just look at these in a little bit of detail. In Seattle, King County, we download and review our resuscitations. Every defibrillator will capture information about rhythm. Here you see a patient who's in ventricular fibrillation. And defibrillators can also capture, shown in green here, is CPR being instituted during the course of resuscitation, whether that uses a puck or an impedance caliber. We now have the capability of having electronic downloads that will tell us what is being provided on scene, and those are things, for example, with respect to CPR rates, interruptions that we have the capability to measure electronically. So capturing not only the written download, but the electronic download can be important in providing an understanding of the caliber of care that's provided on scene and exactly what sort of improvements can occur. We can actually measure CPR statistics. Is CPR being performed at the proper rate, at the proper depth? Is it being performed with minimal interruptions? And it becomes a huge teaching opportunity for the providers themselves to be able to know and get feedback from someone who's overviewed the resuscitation and can provide the kind of information that can help those providers know on the next case what could they be doing differently in an effort to improve resuscitation. The feedback can come in a variety of ways. In Seattle, King County, we actually audio record our resuscitations, and then we provide online the ability for our providers to go to a secure website and to actually review their own resuscitations, where we'll provide them with the statistics of what their performance was with CPR rates, their average time of hands off, and how that compares with our average in King County and what our goals are in terms of that institution. Where that becomes critical is providing feedback to providers. This particular scene is from a depiction of World War II, where fighter pilots coming back from a bombing run during the war would group together and they would review what happened on that bombing raid as to what was accomplished, what could be done differently, and to implement those changes the next go-round. That kind of feedback becomes critical to providers because that way they know they're being observed, their performance is being monitored, and you can use that in a very positive way to improve their outcomes. Now in Seattle, King County, we audio record every resuscitation. In fact, no defibrillator can be vended or provided or sold in King County unless it has the capability of voice recording throughout the resuscitation. And the reason that I think that becomes important is the moment you add voice, you add choreography to reviewing the resuscitation. Compare what you saw on the previous slide of the NASCAR race type of approach to resuscitation versus the Three Stooges potentially resuscitating a patient. You might not be able to pick up the differences between the two unless you actually hear what's happening on scene. And hearing can actually put the reviewer right on the scene of the cardiac arrest to the point where our providers will actually talk to the defibrillator saying, "Doc, we got to move this patient, we're going to have to stop CPR, and I know why a 30-second interlude of no hands-on CPR was being provided." It can add instruction, and it can also give us a feel for the choreography that occurs during a cardiac arrest resuscitation. It can explain the gaps in chest compression, special circumstances, scene control, and it's something that I would encourage your thinking about in your own systems. We never use voice recording in a punitive fashion. In fact, no resuscitation review is ever done punitively for any provider. It's done in a constructive way to educate and to make things better. And our medics will hands down say, "Doc, we appreciate that feedback. We want more of it going forward." And as a result, outcomes tend to improve. Number 6, establish an AED program for first responders. Police are always out there, circulating, they're on the streets, the vehicles are there. Why not take advantage of police providing CPR and first response results when EMS is more delayed in getting on scene? That requires getting buy-in from police, from fire departments, so that people know who's on scene and who are providing care. If you decide to enlist police services or other non-EMS providers, I think the real goal is to keep training simple. This would be a group to teach hands-only CPR, not worry about ventilation, teaching them the basics of AED use, and going from there. Likewise, if you enlist other providers like police, providing feedback to those providers becomes very important. When police are involved in resuscitations in Seattle, King County, we try to find out who those officers were, get back to them so they know that we appreciate what they did, and if we have outcome on that patient, we will provide that information to that officer. Can you imagine how motivating that could be if a police officer knows they saved someone's life in the process of providing law enforcement care? Huge incentive. Likewise, if you institute AED programs, one of the things that I would encourage is to mark your AEDs in a way that people can find them. I'm not sure where this photograph came from, but wouldn't it be wonderful for every AED to be depicted in that way, that someone coming on scene can see that and say, it's not just an AED, I can be part of a mission in order to save someone's life. So one of the challenges is when we place AEDs, and ideally placed in places they will be used, make them so conspicuous that no one can go by without seeing it and recognizing the importance that can have in saving someone's life. That means putting them in high-risk places, making them visible, and ideally making sure that the 911 dispatch system knows where the AED was. In that audio recorded message you heard just a few minutes ago, that dispatcher knew there was an AED nearby and could direct one of the individuals on scene to get that device, bring it to that patient during the course of getting telecommunicator CPR. We are also now in a realm where we have smart technologies. We have the capability of enlisting the public in a way that we never have before. Smartphone apps can now use the dispatch system to be alerted that there's a cardiac arrest going on, and a citizen within a reasonable vicinity of a cardiac arrest, if they're willing to have the app and to become a private citizen providing CPR, can get on scene, perhaps before anyone else would, ideally knowing if there's an AED nearby, bringing that to the scene, and can you imagine the impact that can have of people getting on scene minutes before anyone else does in an effort to improve survival. This is a map of Seattle, and this is where AEDs are located throughout the community and that our dispatchers are aware of. When a pulse point or other system like that comes into play, an individual can be summoned to the scene of a cardiac arrest. They can be told there's an AED within a block of that arrest. They can grab en route and potentially get on scene not only with their hands, but with a device that can improve outcome. Number 8, mandatory CPR training. You've heard about the 3 R's for education. Well, we've added a 4th. It's now reading, writing, arithmetic, and resuscitation. It seems like the skills that we teach in our public schools are important, but one of the most important skills that students can leave with a diploma, high school, from a school, would be knowing not only how to write a check, but how to resuscitate someone who's in cardiac arrest, a basic skill that they can carry through in life. This is a map of the United States, of the states that now have requirements to teach CPR in school. We're not perfect. A number of states still require that to be, need to proceed to get that implemented. And I'd encourage you to look at your own communities to say, is CPR being mandated in the schools? If not, why not? And what can be done to improve that particular strategy? Number 9 and 10 we'll talk about in a little bit more detail tomorrow, but it's accountability. And there are 2 ways I think that an EMS system needs to be accountable. Number 1 is that the providers need to be accountable to the leadership, and the leadership needs to be accountable to the providers. It's a mutual link of accountability. The providers know they want to provide high-level care because they're accountable to me as a medical director. And likewise, I'm accountable to every provider to make sure that they have an environment where they can learn, where they can improve, and where they get the feedback, not only on their performance, but the ultimate outcome to motivate them to go forward. A second part of that is being accountable to our communities. Many communities do not emphasize the importance of EMS in their systems. But if the mayor and other public officials knew how poor, for example, cardiac arrest survival was in that community, wouldn't that be a terrific motivator for them to say, we got to do something. We have to provide funding and support because our statistics are miserable compared to other communities. Likewise, if you track your outcomes through your registry, you can now show performance changes that occur over time. That again makes us accountable as EMS systems, goes back to the public officials, and now they have something to toot their horn over to say, our survival is getting better. We're now better than this other community. We ought to pour even more resources to continue this path going forward. And the final one, which again we'll spend more time on, is probably the hardest one to define, and that is the culture of excellence. What is it that creates a culture where everyone is striving to improve, to do better, to motivate one another, and to go forward? Is there some sort of a secret sauce? Is it a glue? Is it pixie dust? But I guess I'd suggest to you that it's probably all those steps put together and integrated in a way that creates the kind of environment where everyone is pushing forward to improve, providing feedback, encouragement, accountability, and taking all the steps needed and possible to provide care sooner, faster, and of higher quality than what folks might otherwise get. So, 10 programs to improve cardiac arrest outcome. Could I say we think of the links in the chain of survival? The 10 steps and what we want to have you think about for the next couple of days is actually not just the links, but what I'd like to have you think about as the frame of survival. Because it's how we frame those links in terms of leadership, training, quality improvement that ultimately creates the culture of excellence that we all want, that ultimately is going to mean more lives saved from cardiac arrest. I'm done. I think it's time for a Q&A. I think or Tony or whoever is going to step up here and help orchestrate that, but I appreciate your attention.